Hi, welcome to the ShopNotes Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Huber. Today I'm joined by assistant editor Logan Whitmer and designer Dillon Baker. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the projects that we're working on in our home shops. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the difference between our real shop and our dream shop, as well as some troubleshooting questions. So stick around now for this episode of the ShopNotes Podcast.
This episode of the ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Magazine. Woodsmith Magazine has been the trusted source for all your woodworking information for over 40 years. From tips and techniques to furniture projects to shop projects, you'll find it all at Woodsmith Magazine. Subscribe today at woodsmith.com.
Stick around now. I like it. That kind of rolled off your tongue.
Yeah. So, Dillon, I think I'm going to start with you because you're a recent house purchaser and a new shop setter-upper.
I am.
So
we briefly touched on the fact that I'm starting a little bit of renovation work in my home where I figured the best place to start would be in the basement and work my way up. So I ended up framing out around my basement stairs. I live in a house that was built in 1915. It's kind of a four-square craftsman construction. So I had some of my floor supports in my house or joists are starting to sag a little bit, and there was definitely not sufficient structural supports put in place in the basement. There's two rooms in my basement. It's the same floor print as the first as well as second floor. There's a couple floor jacks down there, but again, it needed a little bit of support. And plus I'm trying to figure out how to kind of subdivide the basement a little bit to give myself a little bit of space to work on smaller projects. Unfortunately I'm in a position where it's not realistic to be running power tools down there. I don't have the amps, nor do I really have the space or noise containment or dust collection and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a nice problem to have because I think having those challenges helps you develop a plan for the type of woodworking you want to be doing there versus with the type of woodworking you may be doing for us it's for a job, but maybe it's for a hobby, a lot of I think the power tool fix I can get at work. So I'd like to kind of spend some of my time and focus my energy on some things that I probably wouldn't approach or do maybe at work. Although doing this at home may translate into that in the future, which I'm sure that it more than likely will. So the challenge for me right now is just getting maybe a little bit of a workspace. So I did a workbench for $250, and I went ahead and did a couple different designs. I did a Roubo, and then we settled on an English style workbench. So I'm doing an even smaller version of probably a Roubo bench. But I've also modified the English workbench we did to kind of accommodate the space I have. So I want to start doing maybe some carving. I do have a lathe, so I might be doing some smaller lathe work. I'd like to do probably some more sculptural things, maybe some conceptually driven wood pieces. I'm a big fan of Wendell Castle. He's one of my favorite furniture designers of the 20th century, and I'd be curious to try out one of those stacked laminations that he did. That he ended up, very laboriously carving out of giant laminations of wood. So again, just trying to think about the tools involved that I'll need for that are not power tools. Again, to kind of save on space, and again, what's going to be practical for having a home workshop. So. Beyond having the lathe and the little bench, I'll have a little bit of storage. I thought about having a 14-inch bandsaw down there. I don't know how crucial that will be. I'd probably end up doing a lot of the milling here at work. But outside of that, again, just trying to conceptualize how I want the space, how it's going to work from a continuity standpoint and be economical and not get away with the home life stuff. So,
yeah.
But
because I know part of the topic that we were discussing before we started recording was, where does what did you say before, Logan? Where it was like your ideal shop? Yeah, what would you do different?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've kind of got a blank slate. I mean, the only thing
Right.
the only contingency I have right now is the limited amount of space I have. But I think those are the type of challenges that really drive you to get creative and be clever about your layout for your shop. So, not only will there be less stuff, but the things that I have maybe on a smaller scale as well too, just to again save on space, because I don't want it to be one of those situations where you find yourself tripping over cords or smashing your elbow in the corner of a router table or whatever tool you may have. So I'm realistic about my setup too. It probably will be one of those situations where tools, as they are used, will have to be brought out and then put back away, and just can't be left out like we would have in our ideal shop that we could just walk into and start resawing or cutting sheets of plywood right away if we needed to. So, but that's okay. I mean, again, I think it'll be a nice change from what I'm doing here, and again, it will gain me this a new proficiency with hand tools and the way I strategize with the way I think about developing and designing projects. So. Yeah.
Well, I mean, a basement shop is kind of nice because you're always just kind of steps away from it. There's no, going outside for it necessarily. You're usually has a little better temperature control than a external building. And
yeah, that's one of those things with given all the, I guess, extra weekend time to think about when I've been strategizing my home projects is I've started to kind of kick myself for buying a home without a pre-existing garage or a basement that may accommodate a full shop. But that's okay. Like I said, it provides you the opportunity to get clever with your situation. So
yeah,
all in due time.
Yep.
Well, Chris does that. I believe he has a bandsaw and a bench, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe a drill press in his shop at home. In his basement, and I might be wrong, but I think his is an older house as well, like a turn of the century house. So
it's an old farmhouse, yeah.
Yep. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think after almost 20 years of Chris being subjected to loud noises and any other sort of self-inflicted abuse, that I think it was time for him to have a quiet place away from it all. I think I may have mentioned this before, but I'll never forget the day that he showed up to work and backed up his pickup truck to our dumpster and just unloaded his table saw. And I think there was a handful of other power tools that he just had been exhausted of and just dumped in the trash like a bad habit. So
that's funny.
Well, sometimes you have to just quit cold turkey. It's the only way to do it.
Just rip off the Band-Aid.
Yep.
That's apparently a necessary cleansing.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said, Dillon, for, deliberately making some different choices, because we do have, and, before you came to Woodsmith, you had basically a business production shop.
Right.
And to think that all home woodworkers have to have that in micro scale in their home shop or full size, I think is a disservice to woodworkers too, that there are so many different ways to build projects or to work with wood beyond what's often shown.
Yeah, it's certainly, even from somebody, all of us that have been doing woodworking for quite some time now, it's very easy to be disillusioned, I think, by what it takes to have a successful shop. And again, whether that's from a commercial standpoint or even a home use standpoint, that's the other part of it is, us having these different backgrounds, but also different shop layouts. It gives us something to talk about and, let people know that woodworking is more accessible than you may have thought. So, everybody that grew up with or used to watch, Yankee Workshop with Norm Abram, you don't have to have that to, perform or have similar results. There's a lot out there that you can do to accommodate those sorts of procedures. So, and that's, why we're here, is to kind of, again, help people realize that woodworking is a little bit more accessible than what you may have perceived in the first place. So,
yeah. Logan?
I presented this because I'm sitting in my shop looking around, and I've I've decided there are certain things that just are going to leave my shop. One of which, well, legs have no place in a shop. Anything that dust can get under is a terrible thing, right?
Right.
So like I'm going to spin my computer a little bit without knocking everything off. Maybe, I don't know if I can get that far. But that over there is a one-wall workshop that we built back in. I don't know if that was a Woodsmith, if that was a ShopNotes one.
It is a ShopNotes one.
It's beautiful. Like it would be a beautiful like craft center or something to set up in your back room or spare bedroom or whatever. And that one works pretty well because it's up off the ground, so I could sweep under it. Okay.
Yeah.
However, one of the things I have on there is my Wilton vise. You can just barely see it right there. Okay.
Okay.
So, those cabinets are attached to the wall. And as I'm sawing, this cabinet behind me and that cabinet are just rattling because the entire wall is shaking. I mean, that's a heavy vise. It's like 70 pounds, right?
Yeah.
But it's shaking. So I can't scooch it away from the wall because it's attached to the wall. If I could scooch it away from the wall, it would have legs, which my bench has feet, and you can dust gets underneath it. I also have another tool cabinet in here that I started building. It's that the one we had in the video studio with that carved molding, right?
Right.
I started out of walnut. I got the base pretty much done, and now it's just sitting in here, and it just is a catch-all for stuff. But dust gets under it, and I've decided I don't want that thing in my shop because it's just shavings and crap get caught under it. So what I would change about my shop, nothing would have feet like that. Casters are okay because you can roll it out of the way and sweep right?
Yeah.
Or vacuum. Legs or feet, something that lifts up whatever it is off the ground and stuff can get underneath it. That sucks to keep clean. Now, it might not be that big a deal if my shop wasn't attached to my basement.
Yeah.
If it was like a separate building, which if there's any blessings in disguise, it's in the last 4 weeks. My wife has said, "Hey, us building you a shop outside of our house has went to the top of the priority list." So there's always
sounds like a green light.
Exactly. We have other projects we need to do this year. But she said that went up on the list. So there's a silver lining in this whole quarantine work from home thing. But the things I would change in this shop and the things I will probably change here fairly soon. I've decided these two wall cabinets behind me. So I have a sawtill up here. I have a smaller cabinet under here that has all my molding planes and other hand planes and stuff on it. You guys can kind of see that if you're watching the video. They're nice for storing stuff. I also have a TV next to me. There's a TV on the wall, and behind that TV is my my sub panel for this shop. So I have a 65 or 70 amp sub panel for this shop. I think I'm going to pull that off the wall, because I've avoided putting anything around it, but I don't really turn my TV on in the shop. If I ever turn anything on, it's like my phone and I just listen to a book, and I recently picked up a set of Bluetooth headphones. They're like 3M ones. So I just put those on and listen to a book on tape. So I don't really use the TV, and I could really use that wall space. So that's easy to change. And all the stuff that I'm saying that I would like to change about my shop is all stuff I can change pretty easily and stuff I'm going to change here probably in the next couple of weeks. I wish that I would have a better metalworking area in my shop. Last week I showed that little brass plane I've been building. And Phil, you mentioned how building tools can get addictive, and it really can. And I find myself thinking, God, this might be something I do quite often. Because they're super fun. So I kind of wish I had a little bit better metalworking area. Now, my garage, I have a bench in my garage as well, and that would work. But I'm a baby, and I don't like the heat, and I don't like the cold. I like to be very, very comfortable. I like to wear my shop Crocs. So I would really like a better metalworking area in my shop, but I don't know how to do that without building a separate bench.
Yeah.
So that workbench or that tool cabinet I started needs to leave. I'm gonna probably try to find a way to reinforce this one wall workshop that my vise is on right now, just because I want something that doesn't move as I'm sawing or peening. Peening over the brass or whatever. I want something that's not going to move. And those are the two big things. I also have, so in my mind, when I started putting this shop together, my philosophy was I don't need to store any materials in the shop. Okay. I can rough cut it out in the garage and then carry it around to my sliding glass door and carry it in, or carry it down the stairs. I actually have some rough cut lumber that's finishing drying in my back room, which is down the hall from my shop. So I have a rack in there that has some walnut that's air dried, and I've just been letting it acclimate now. But I think it was disillusion because I have a bookcase in my shop that's full of magazines. It's full of some fine woodworkings that we were getting rid of when we kind of cleaned out our work library. It's full of a lot of books that I've purchased. I've bought a lot of the Lost Art Press books. I have some canoe building books, some forestry books and stuff. There's no reason for that to be in my shop. Yeah. I mean, I might grab one to reference once in a while, but that would be a whole lot more convenient to have to walk to get that than to walk to get material. So where my bookcase is sitting right now, I think I'm going to actually build in some material storage, which is something I think I wanted to. I didn't think I wanted it, but now I do. Now I'm like, you know what? That's something I do need in my shop, because I'm sitting here looking around. And I just have a lot of like random turning blanks. I was working on some chisel handles, and I'll show you guys those in a little bit, but I have just this random little stockpile of turning stuff. It's like I wish I had somewhere to put all that. That's close. So I think I'm going to move my lumber rack back in here, or move it in here. It's never been in here, and get some material storage. So it's all easy stuff to change, but it just goes to show that as you're building and you start working more and more in your shop, I think you kind of learn what you actually want in your shop and what you actually need. And I think for everybody's shop, it kind of evolves as you go. Like you might start, Dillon, you might think, oh, I'm going to do a lot of hand tool stuff and like carving, stuff like that. That might change down the road though. And it's easy enough to add and change and move. So, and move just like Phil is right now.
Right. Well, I just thought of something that I wanted to show off a little later in the show, but
yeah, so it's, it's just one of those things that's like they're looking around and sitting in here every day for the last couple of weeks, just working on, magazine stuff. That's like, hey, that would be really nice, and I wish I would have had the foresight to do it. But there's no crying over spilt milk, because I can always go back and change a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not like I mean, yeah, I want my shop to be bigger than 16 by 24, but compared to a lot of people's shops, that's a big shop.
Right.
I don't really need much more area than this. If I do need more area than this, it would be for more of like commercial lumber storage. So like sawing and milling and storing lumber for sale.
Stockpiling gasoline.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Taking all my money out of the stock market and putting it all into gasoline stores on my property. I'm sure my insurance agency would love it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned having lumber storage in your shop, and it's my first basement shop. I didn't really want a lot of storage space because I wanted to maximize shop space.
Yeah.
But when you do that, and especially if you're like me, where you end up with like 2 or 3 projects in the works at the same time, it's like, where do those materials go? And then they just turn into little mounds of stuff leaned against a wall, and it's actually less organized and takes up more space than if you would have something dedicated to it.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm finding. It's like on this one wall workshop where I'm usually sitting at my computer. there's a pile of turning blanks on it, and then I have more lumber stacked in the corner where next to my bookshelf, and then it's like I got lumber on on my bench right now. It's like it's all over the place. It's taken over. So and I thought that I would be it's not going to be that inefficient to walk to my garage to get something. It's terribly inconvenient. It's like I really wish I had a piece of plywood this size. I have to walk up to the garage, find one, bring it down here. It's like it'd be much better if it was over here in the corner.
Well, and then you wonder about acclimation things too.
For sure. Yeah. Yep.
So now, see, my shop is in my garage, and whoever built my garage was somewhat inspired because they made it's a normal 2-car wide, but they made it an extra 8 feet deep. So I have the whole back. My shop is narrow and shallow and deep, or whatever you want to call it. It's like 8 feet by 24 or 26 or something like that. So it's actually pretty nice, and I like having everything out there. But you do end up having to make. It's just problem solving. Like Dillon was saying earlier about being creative with how you do things. Like for example, I have a little. There's my metalworking station. Is just a vice stand project that we had done in ShopNotes, and it works really well because it's off to the side, and I can kind of keep everything. I got a vise on it, and my hand crank grinder whenever I need to do some sharpening. Otherwise, it can tuck out of the way, and it provides a decent sized work surface that I can keep the metal junk kind of away from the rest of my woodworking bench. So I'm not, getting metal filings and stuff on there. Plus, it's also a nice place, being out in the garage where I can, do something with the kids' bikes or sharpen mower blades or shovels or something like that, just to have it pretty handy. So I think for me, the big thing that I would change about my shop is more is going back and changing my mindset that of what a shop needs to have in it in order for it to be legit. So in terms of equipment, that I always thought that I had to have these 4 or 5 things. And as a result, all of my shop spaces have ended up being crammed to the gills with things, and it was tough to move around. Whereas recently I sold my table saw, and now my shop is so much bigger, and I find it so much more freeing to work in, having that extra space, that it just doesn't feel crowded. It's more enjoyable to spend time in here. So that's a big thing. I think we do that intentionally and unintentionally in woodworking magazines, where we're trying to assume that readers have X set of tools. But on the other hand, it ends up being somewhat proscriptive in the sense that you can get the idea that in order to do woodworking, you need X set of tools. And that's not really the case. So I think I would have, just remind my past self and my past shops that I didn't really need a bunch of stuff. And it's almost better to do without and to learn other skills than it is to try and feel like you have everything, because I did I wanted to have a dovetail jig, like if you have a dovetail jig, just think how awesome you could do. Every drawer would have dovetails and blah, blah, blah. And so I went crazy trying to come up with a dovetail jig. And then when I had one, I almost never used it. And then because of that, when you go to use it, you got to reteach yourself how to use it. And then it takes longer. And so, and then I think, early on, right after I graduated from college, I didn't do a bunch of woodworking because I thought, I live in an apartment. What can I have for a workshop? So I kind of had talked my way out of it, resigned myself to the fact that I could just do woodworking through magazines or something like that, rather than just thinking, hey, how about you take the space that you have and see what you can do with it?
Well, that's kind of the catch 22 of woodworking too. I mean, you can't, you don't have that foresight going into woodworking as a new woodworker,
right?
Because you don't have that perspective. You don't have that level of knowledge, knowing that, X amount of tools can perform X amount of duties. But, as woodworking continues to redefine itself and, newer technologies are developed. I mean, who's to say what you really need? I mean, there's so many guys now that have, a CNC machine that pretty much does most of the things they want it to do,
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, like when we featured the CNC machine in the magazine, that was a big discussion point even among the staff, where it's like, who would spend X amount of money on a CNC? Mm-hmm. And yet I've been around some woodworkers when, like at our live event last fall and a couple of seminars, where they're like, they have a CNC machine and they can't understand why anybody would spend more than $600 on a table saw. Like, why would you do that?
Right.
It's all perspective.
Yeah.
It is. And it's just all what you're interested in. I mean, again, different tools, they can perform more than just one task. So
yeah,
again, I think that's definitely always a challenge for us, because we're trying to write and develop content as someone who would want to read this stuff too. So you're constantly putting yourself in the shoes of the person that's going to be absorbing the content. And you can't really, you have to assume everything, but nothing at the same time in terms of what people have or don't have. So it's, you're going to either read the article or you're not, you're going to build the project or you're not, I don't know. It's kind of an impossible thing, but we love doing it.
Well, and it's funny because there's 1,000 different ways to do stuff, and there's never really that's what drives me nuts about some people in this profession, is that their way is the right way. It's like, no, I mean, I find myself more, I gravitate more towards the people in the woodworking industry, instructors and stuff like that are like, hey, this is the way I do it, but there's 1,000 ways to do it. I mean,
yeah,
it's Phil, you said you sold your table saw, so people are like, oh, how the heck do you rip boards? You have a bandsaw.
Yeah,
it's like you rip your boards on a bandsaw. It's like, well, how do you cut dados? It's like, you put a bit in a router and you do it. I mean,
yeah,
there's 1,000 different ways to do stuff, and I think it's interesting because it's, I think, a cycle that most of us as woodworkers go through. I know on myself I did. I ended up with 1,000,000 tools, and it's like there's so much stuff here that it's almost sensory overload. So then you start purging stuff, and then it's like you pare it down to your minimalist set that you need, and you might find you prefer one way over another way. It's like, I love cutting dados with the table saw. I know, Phil, you love doing them with the router.
Yeah.
It's different strokes for different folks.
Yeah. So I think that's and maybe it's just because having been at Woodsmith for this amount of time is just realizing how what we say carries implications for it, whether they're explicit or implicit.
Right.
And I wanted, when you're showing a technique for building a project, I mean, you have to land somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you can't just say, now you need to make dados and then give a list of 12 different ways that you can make dados, because it's an impossibly long article for one, and for two, it's not a help to anybody.
Right.
But how do you talk about that in such a way where it's like, crap, now I need a $3,000 cabinet saw and a $400 dado set,
Yeah.
And plus I got to quit my job to actually be able to accomplish these things.
Yeah.
Right. So it's finding where that balance point is, and just being able to reassure myself and other people that, hey, just do what you can do, and then figure it out. That, there is a lot to be said for experience, like you said before, Dillon, about, it's easy to be able to have my experienced self go back and tell my inexperienced self that he was an idiot. But, it's like you almost can't know it. It's like having kids, it's like you
can read as many books on it as you want, but.
Right. And people can give you all sorts of advice, but it doesn't mean anything until you actually have kids,
Yeah.
Yep.
Everything in life is circumstantial.
Yeah.
For sure. So, Phil, what would you change in your shop? If you could go back, when you bought your house,
Right.
what would you change about how you set your shop up?
Experience fill, sell inexperience fill.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I probably would have tried to talk myself out of keeping the table saw
For as long as
a
you
lot
did.
sooner. Yeah.
Because I know when I started Woodsmith 3 years ago, you had talked about selling it.
Right. And I batted this idea around for the longest time, probably much to the annoyance of you and other people. But yeah, I just, for as much space as it took up, and it wasn't that big of a saw. It was a Craftsman contractor style saw that I had my router table built into one of the wings. So what's the table on that? Like 27 inches by, 40 or 60 inches or something like that altogether. But it's got the motor hanging out the back, and then, it had to be placed in such a way so that I could get behind it and long enough boards to move through it and that kind of thing. And that end of my shop just always felt super cluttered. Like I had to weave your way to get back there, and it was tough to get to my lumber rack. And while it was a nice saw, it wasn't the best. The rip fence had some issues with staying in alignment. So it was like you're constantly working with that. And so, but then, I've recently been, even before wanting to get rid of my table saw, I was wanting to have a bandsaw and being able to do a lot with a bandsaw. Because we have some nice ones in the Woodsmith office. And with some experience, it's kind of shocking how accurately you can work with a bandsaw.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't take up as much space as a table saw, and the cutting action is so much more efficient that I can resaw 5-inch boards on my little 12-inch bandsaw that has a 3rd horsepower motor on it.
Sure. So
anyway, again, not to try and make it seem like everybody has to ditch their table saw and get a bandsaw. I'm not trying to say that, but what I'm trying to say, I guess, is think about what you want in a shop. And for me, I've really realized how much having an open, inviting space is in terms of my creativity, my enjoyment of being in the shop, because my home workshop is not my workplace. So it's more about enjoyment of the process of what I'm doing and the things that I'm making. So
cool.
But I will agree with you on the workbench leg situation, Logan, because I built my bench and I've been happy with 90% of it. The sucker part is, again, because it's in my garage and it's not conditioned space, and I'm not in here every day. So the underside of the bench is just plane shavings and router shavings and spider webs and invariably when you drop some piece of equipment, it rolls under there and you feel like Indiana Jones reaching into the snake pit every time. It's just not.
Yeah.
They need to figure out a way to magnetize all that stuff with reverse polarity, so everything levitates in your shop. I would invest in that.
Yeah, it's like, and there's some things you can't get away from that on, right? Like, if you have casters, inevitably you have some space under there for the casters to roll.
Right.
But it's like, my workbench, same thing. It has 5 inches underneath. It's just, and I sized it just right to where a broom doesn't fit under there.
Yeah.
That's
just bad design.
I know, it was a terrible decision. Which I've talked about rebuilding this bench for a while. I'm sitting at the bench right now. I've talked about rebuilding it for a while, and I think I'm gonna do like the bench crafted shaker style bench.
Oh, okay.
It's made out of a couple sheets of plywood and then a laminated top. It's a cabinet base. It's like there's nowhere for shavings to go. And then the only thing I'd be stuck with in my shop that could get shavings underneath it, besides my 2 carts in here, is I have an outfeed table that's it's the Craig base on it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So there's space underneath it. There's maybe 10 inches underneath the shelf. It's enough that if stuff gets under there, you see it, so it gets cleaned out immediately. So not that big a deal. But so should we talk about what we've been working on?
Sure.
I have been messing around with. Last week I showed the pear wood that I'm using for this miter plane. I've also turned some pear handles for some chisels.
Nice.
Yeah, these are the sister ones. They're the ones you turned, Phil, for our video edition subscribers. Here's my massive zombie killing weapon, my big old slick. I turned a socket style handle for.
Yeah.
It's same type of shape. This is for a tang chisel I have. And then I also have another. I'm trying not to drop the slick on my knee because you guys will see real life me going to the emergency room. Then I have another tang style one or a socket style one. This is for just a carving gouge or a gouge. So just slight variances in the little like finial type thing here, to where it's going to terminate into the handle. This one will get a ferrule on it and then get burned in. But man, I don't know that I can express how much I love these weird woods, like I think, and I get that we're a little privileged being in the industry that we work with walnut and cherry and oak, and we work with all the standard traditional woods that a lot of people are like, oh, I love working with this wood, but I don't get to very often because it's expensive in my area, or I just don't have that type of project come up very often. We get to work with this stuff every day. So I get that I might be a little blind. I recognize that fact, but I love these non-traditional woods. You can't go out and buy pear wood. You could buy Swiss pear, but this is, I don't know what type of pear this is. This is a tree I took down at my grandpa's place probably 10 years ago. It's phenomenal. It's hard. It turns beautifully. And it has this weird, streaking in it. Some of it doesn't. This one on this socket one it's pure creamy pale. And it works so nicely. It works like Apple does. And it's just, I have I don't know if I mentioned or not, I have a sawmill showing up next week that I purchased. And that's something I love, is these weird woods that you would never think of. A lot of them, they're smaller trees. So the pear trees only get about 10 inches. So you're not going to get much board stock out of it, but you get enough turning stock. Same way with the apple trees. I went out to an orchard a couple days ago to look at the trees that they've pulled out of the ground because I would like to mill some of them. Some of that stuff is just it's such a cool commodity, and I love the uniqueness of it. So I've been working on these handles. I have 3 of them turned. I have that's my dog's tail. If you guys are seeing that pop up, she's trying to get me to pet her. I've turned 3 of them. I think I have 5 more chisels that need handles, and I'm just going to keep going with this. I have a couple feet of this stock. There's a section that I have left here. It'll be fun. I'm going to whip out a couple more this week. I've been finishing this stuff with the Skeleton Saws peacock oil.
Sure.
Which the first couple times we used it, our former editor Vince had turned a chisel handle. I don't know what it is with us and chisel handles with the peacock oil, but Vince had turned a chisel handle with out of I think his might have been beech as well, Phil. And he tried the peacock oil on it and wasn't very excited about it. And yours, the beech, didn't get much color from the peacock oil. But I think we have to be more patient with the application because these ones turn out phenomenal. It's a very, very subtle, low sheen finish. But man, it is silky smooth. And it's, like I said, it's from Skeleton Saws is the people that manufacture it from the UK. They make some very, very, very high-end saws. And this is what they put on their handles. And it's a silky finish. We can't wait for the quarantine to be over so you guys can feel how smooth and silky my chisel handles are, because they are they are awesome.
I wonder if it's a difference in the material too, because like you said, I did these.
Yeah, I did
mine out of beech.
Yep.
And 2 things. One, I think beech is a little bit more porous on the surface than pear is.
Definitely.
And I know that you also sanded yours up much finer than I did.
Yeah.
I think I went up to 220 on these, which worked really well, but.
Yep. And I went up to 600. I went up to 600, then raised the grain, knocked it down. And then I did 4 coats of the peacock oil within an hour. Actually 5. I did 5 coats within the hour. And then every day for 3 days, I used my fingertips and rubbed in another coat. This is per the instructions. And it just is a silky smooth finish, and it's awesome. And I've been finishing it with the Alfie Shine. I'll let them dry for 48 hours after the final coat, and then throw some of that Alfie Shine wax on there, and it just love it. I wouldn't do a furniture piece with it because it's a lot of freaking work when I can just spray a coat of lacquer on it. But for something small like this that takes me 10 minutes to put a coat on, it's beautiful. I love it.
I'd be curious to see some resin impregnated handles you do for whether they're chisels or your Dick Prenicky slick you've got going on over there.
I have some. I did a turning seminar. Was that last week? 2 weeks ago? Anyways, I did a pen turning seminar for our Woodsmith seminars, and I pulled out. I actually have a piece of apple that was resin impregnated. And I should turn something out of that. It's not very long. It's only, maybe 4 inches long. But I should turn something out of that and try that peacock oil on it to see how that looks, because that would probably look fantastic.
Yeah.
So what do you got going on, Phil?
Well, I'll put some pictures on of the completed nightstand. That one got wrapped up last week, and was pretty excited about it. I think the style of it is sort of got some Gothic elements to it that I'm pretty excited about, without being like super dark Batman-y Gothic kind of thing.
I think that's kind of poetic because it's made out of basswood, right? So it's super light. It's
super light, yeah. Gothic light, maybe. Is that a new thing now?
I think so, yes.
So I'm pretty excited about that. And then I had mentioned this on last week's episode. I had a little pruning saw handle where the blade retracted in it, but it was just a little bit too small, and I wanted to be able to get to farther branches. So I made there's the blade, and then I made a handle that's 18 inches long or something on it. So the blade itself kind of looks a little undersized for the handle, but what I like about it is that I can use it two-handed now to be able to get a decent grip on it, or to be able to get branches that are just a little bit higher, but kind of in between where I'd want to get my pole saw out, where it's, you don't want to use a giant pole saw when it's like just above your head sort of thing. So after I got done with it, because I was looking at some like Japanese wood-handled tools like mallets and hammers and pruning saws. So I was kind of channeling a little bit of that. And then when I got done and was wrapping up this one, I'm like, it totally looks like the elf sword handles from like the beginning of Lord of the Rings. Just
100%.
Yeah. So Gil-galad's arborists used these saws. So.
Oh, I appreciate that so much because I'm listening to that book on tape right now. Oh, the nerdy podcast from the guys at Woodsmith.
Yeah. So, and then in the spirit of all things shop-built tools, I was also using, last week I'd also talked about my desk organizer that I had finished then, but I got to use, and been trying to use more, this rabbiting plane that I made.
Oh, cool.
I did it, it's out of cherry with a maple sole on it. And then, I don't know how well you can see it on the end grain, but I did it Krenov style where it's laminated. So I have these narrow cheek pieces on here so that I didn't have to do all the excavation for the blade openings. I did it in the Krenov style. So
it's
iron just kind of fun. What's that?
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah.
Was the iron something you had already from another rabbiting plane?
Yeah, it was a one. It's like a replacement iron for those ECE.
Oh, sure.
Or Primus style,
Yeah.
whatever. So, but I mean, any rabbiting plane blade would work. You just kind of make the body to match, and it's been real fun to use that again. And
Does it work well?
oh yeah, it works really well. And
Awesome.
I don't know if it's a function of all rabbiting planes, or the bed angle that I have this one at, but it's got this, when you use it, normally when you're using like a smoothing plane, you're taking, relatively thin shavings, and it's kind of a whooshing sound. This has a like tearing the air kind of a
Zip.
sound to it, because you can take much bigger shavings, and I don't know if it's just the resonance of the wood and the blade or whatever, but it's kind of fun.
I found that with some of these molding planes, like the half rounds and stuff. When you're hitting the corners, you can just take off pretty big chunks in one pass, and they just kind of go whoop, and curl right out the side, and it's like, that's so fun. It makes me want to make a spill plane for no reason,
So Dillon, how about you? You were talking about the lanterns last week.
Yeah. So
do you have any personal projects you got working on?
I do. One of my favorite things to do is to dig through old period style furniture books I have, and I have quite a few of them on Victorian and Shaker furniture. And I was flipping through a book. I've since forgotten the author, but the title is, I think it's either Understanding Shaker Furniture or Build Your Own Shaker Furniture. I mean, something along the lines of, providing you with a little bit of background, but also some dimensioning. And there's maybe 5 to 10 projects in there that you can accomplish. They're, old renderings with dimensioning on it. But there's a bench in there, and the thing I like about Shaker furniture is that I feel like it's by design, it's very modern. I mean, there's no superfluous design features. It's a direct representative of how those people live their lives, and it's still very relevant, I think, in the look of them. But there's this bench in there, and I started reading about it, and one of the first things it says is it's meant to not be comfortable, and I just thought that was hilarious. And there's not a lot to it. I mean, other than the fact the bench is designed to either be out on a porch or pulled up to a dining table. There wasn't really a specific use, which again is kind of the mantra of a lot of Shaker furniture, but it's almost it's very similar to that bench that you built recently, Phil, I think out of pine, where I think you just did kind of either a redesign or you altered the construction a little bit to simplify it and streamline it. And so this is very similar to this or to that. And it's just a lot larger on scale, but the simplicity of the joinery with, I don't think there's any more than maybe like 6 or 8 screws on it. And that's really just to adhere the base into the top plank, which is the seating part of it. But I don't know. I just like the idea of kind of adopting these very quick projects, maybe when I have time, that can be accomplished in, maybe a day in the shop or a half day in the shop, and, yield the results that you want. But I was really more inspired by a sense of humor, whether it was deliberate or not, in describing the bench. But I would like to accomplish that probably this weekend. So I hope to have that as maybe a visual aid, and we'll see where it ends up on the social medias. But I've got that, and then I'm starting to work on a set of Japanese street vendor stools for Popular Woodworking.
Oh.
So I found a series of them on a British auction site, and there's really not a lot of backstory to these. There's certainly a lot of backstory about street food culture in Japan, but not like this specific piece of furniture. So I'm kind of interested in getting into that. What do they call it? The provenance of the piece, essentially. But I'm going to design a couple different versions of that. So I'm getting started, and then moving into working on 251, Woodsmith 251. So I have a little bit more to talk about with those, maybe in the coming weeks, a little bit more development in the design process. So, but
cool.
Yeah.
All right. I got one last thing, kind of like a, I don't know, self-inflicted reader question here. So, I've been one of my New Year's resolutions was to add some new hand skills to my abilities. And one of those is jointing edges. So since I don't have my table saw anymore, getting straight square edges with a bandsaw is, like 70% bandsaw technique and a sharp blade, and 20% with a cleaning up the blade marks with a hand plane. So
Yep.
I have this number 7 sized jointer plane. It's actually a Woodsmith design. So it's actually made by the Stanley Works, but for Montgomery Wards. And so this is my question to the both of you, and then also to the listeners, is when I use it to do joint the edges for a glue up, like you can get a straightish edge, like for the front and back edge of a tabletop or something like that, where it only has to look straight and be relatively smooth, so it doesn't, not that big of a deal. And I've used it for that a lot, and it works great. But now when I'm trying to do jointed edges for like a panel glue up, I'll joint the edges. A lot of times I'll put the two boards kind of face to face, and joint those both edges at the same time so that when I fold them back up, they, it should match. However, and I don't know where my technique is going wrong because I've tried to play around with different things. I get a nice tight joint for 85% of the length of the glue line. But then at the very end, always away from me, never on the near end, I'll get just the tiniest little gap between the two pieces, like a hairline, but enough that even if I try and clamp it together, it's not going to clamp tight.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out what the heck is causing that and what I need to do different. Because then what I'll do is I'll go back and I'm like, okay, well, the natural answer is I'll just make like a little bit of a hollow in the middle, do your old spring joint, and that should clear things up, right? Nope. I get the spring joint plus that little gap at the end.
So my initial thoughts, now I'm not a edge jointing master. I can do it, but I go very slow and I use a square the entire length.
Sure.
I think what you're doing is putting too much pressure on the toe at the end.
You think so?
Yep. Because I have always started with, I don't want to grab that number 7. I've always started with, I don't know. My planes are all too far away. Screw it. I always start with a lot of pressure on the toe. Right. With, okay. So I could almost take my hand off the toe and the plane will stay there. And then as I start my pass, I'm even pressure.
Right.
And then when I get to the end, it's opposite. My hand is always on the tote and I can little to no pressure on the knob.
Yeah.
On the very end. Because I guess I've never had that happen where I've had scoops happen where you're taking more off the middle than the two ends. And then in essence, that's a spring joint. Not that big a deal. It actually works out really nice. But yeah, I would say that it's probably too much pressure on the very end of the board.
Yeah.
Would be my guess. And it's probably only the last, 6 inches?
Not even. It's probably like 2 inches.
Interesting.
So it's not that much. And I'm, when I'm jointing, I don't usually have my hand on the knob.
Sure.
I'm usually kind of giving it that pinch grip, so that I can kind of feel
the edge. Yep.
Feel the edge a little bit and try and keep the plane a little more square to it. Squareness wise, I'm actually kind of shocked on how easy that was to pick up as a skill. Like I'll do it and then I'll still check it just to make sure. But, the more I do it, I've found that I find a natural square.
Yep.
That I'm pretty close, that I don't have to spend a lot of time correcting squareness. It's just that last little bit. So.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're just giving 97% when you should be giving 100%.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I've always heard with joining or doing longer pieces is that you really want to, not get a running start, but you really want to put basically your weight behind the plane to kind of create an even amount of not just forward motion, but also the amount of pressure you're applying to the piece.
Yeah.
I can't speak from experience. This is only based off things I've read. I haven't done a whole lot of really hand joining. My recommendation to you is just buy a power joiner like everybody else. But that's, I mean, that's gotta be frustrating. I mean, especially if it's only like the last 2 inches. I mean,
right.
And if you're using the entirety of the board, it's one thing if you're cross cutting your ends like you would with, something that went through a power planer or joiner. But
and I think that's, if it were extra long, but part of it is like, I don't want to spend a bunch of time joining edges that I'm going to end up cutting away.
Right. Right.
So I was, but then I was also thinking that it shouldn't be that hard to learn how to joint these 2 edges and get a solid glue line, and like I said, the rest of it is like almost, it's super tight. It's really awesome to see that and have that satisfaction there. But, I end up going from like a 6-inch wide board down to like a 5.25 inch wide board because you keep trying to chase down this tiny little gap.
Which is funny because I feel like I get a much better, much more consistent glue line with my number 7 than I do with a power jointer.
Right.
And just looking at a hand plane, right? So you're writing the whole surface.
Yeah.
It has to be that, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the board. And that's why I'm thinking maybe the toes just diving a little bit, and it's not much. It can't be much.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. That's interesting.
So if anybody's ever had that happen to them, I'd be interested in your feedback on that. So you can send us an email at woodsmith@woodsmith.com, and that'll get to me, and we'll look at it that way.
So
otherwise, I think we'll wrap this one up, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Thanks, Dillon, for joining us. And thank you for listening to this episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. I want to remind you that we have a episode guide on our website, woodsmith.com/podcasts, where each episode we kind of feature some photos, if you've only been listening to this, of the projects that we've been working on, as well as some links and of some of the topics that we've talked about. Also, no matter where you're listening to the ShopNotes Podcast, if you wouldn't mind leaving us a 5-star rating. Higher ratings help us get the ShopNotes Podcast out to a lot of other woodworkers just like you. So if you'd like to share this podcast with other people, that's a great way of doing it. Otherwise, we thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week on the ShopNotes Podcast. This episode of the ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Plans. You'll find nearly 1,000 plans covering everything that you'd want to build, from furniture projects to gift projects, kitchen accessories, workshop projects and jigs, and more. Find your next project at woodsmithplans.com.